Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Henchman's Memoirs. This is our campaign recap of our Dark Souls of Drakkenheim campaign. My party has completed their first couple of quests and know that they have one last quest ahead of them before they can level up to level 4. And so they have taken a quest on behalf of the Knights of the Silver Order to go to Reed Manor and find out what Oscar Yoren, the malfeasant wizard, is up to and what he has learned about delirium and about the haze and about the comet that struck the city 20 years ago. So here in our party, of course, is Pietor, the human monk, Deus, the gnome druid. We've got Atticus, the human artificer, and bringing up the rear is old Nexel, the hag-born sorcerer. Now, if you guys know, if you've been watching this series, every different area of the city I like to give its own weird, haunted, sort of semi-post-apocalyptic flavor as the parties head to the different adventure locations that are shown in the book. And so Reed Manor is inside the haze, but it's kind of outside of the built-up part of the town, off towards the hills. So I decided to use this idea I had of a part of the city being completely flooded, and all the buildings, are like Venice. They're all, the first couple stories are in water. There aren't any buildings out here, but I decided to use my flooded region anyway. And I set up the table to represent, as the water gets deeper and it goes from being just sort of swampy and marshy to actually being like small, shallow lakes, as they try to reach the manor, they encountered this sort of trail that it was obvious people were using to come and go. They left their horses there at Eckerman's Mill, which is outside the haze, and they saw the names of some other adventuring companies, and they wrote their name. Their name had been We So Thorny, but for now they're going by Pietor and the rest, like here on Gilligan's Island. It's Pietor and the rest, and so they put that as their name, and they listed Talon originally, and then they crossed him off because he's the only person they've lost so far. He left the party. And now as they get out into the really wet parts, they see this trail between Eckerman's Mill and the city where people have laid out like a ladder or some boards or one of the vanes from the windmill of Eckerman's Mill, or, a fallen tree or whatever over the wettest parts of this sort of swampy, shallow lake area. And so they can see clearly looking ahead how they want to go. They're just going to follow this trail of all these different improvised bridges. I don't think they rolled any random encounters, so all they had to do was get past the sort of environmental challenge I had for them. And they decided they wanted to go slow. You can choose between 3 speeds in the Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign. And if you go slow, you're going to roll more encounter checks, but you can use perception, you can use stealth, and you can try to see ahead of time what you're getting into. So that allowed them to see that one of these sort of ladders that was laid across a particularly wet area looked like it wasn't very stable. And so they decided they were going to try to be careful crossing it. I think Pietor crossed first. He's a monk. He doesn't hardly have any armor on. And of course, Deus is just a little halfling. He's just a little gnome man. He crossed, but he didn't even have to roll. And then it was old Atticus here who made a terrible dexterity roll, and as he was about halfway across, the bridge collapsed. Now, I don't want you to think that I'm one of those terrible DMs that doesn't foreshadow when something's going to be difficult. So I had already described that as they moved around, they were attracting the attention of all these giant moray eels that I got from 5th edition foes from Necromancer Game. And by the time they got this far to this particularly weak ladder or whatever had been laid across the water there, they're just thick underneath. We're just waiting for somebody to drop into the water, and they're just crawling all over each other, waiting for somebody to fall. And of course, it's Atticus who falls in. So we roll initiative, and I describe these giant eels swarming towards Atticus. I think Nexel got off some kind of a divine light spell, did some radiant damage to one of them, but then they all close in. Atticus has a pretty good armor class, but one of them got a pretty good attack, and so you automatically get grappled when they bite you. And then their second internal mouth comes out and starts gnawing at you, and it can give you a terrible, debilitating, necrotic flesh rotting poison. So it seemed like I was out to get Atticus, like I had a grudge against his player or something. I definitely didn't, but it was an ugly situation. I did describe the one who hit kind of got inside. He's wearing half plate, kind of got inside his breastplate there and kind of bit him on the left side of the chest, and his nipple was in danger of being ripped off. And of course, since he's grappled, he can't move. So then he's got to use his action to try to break the grapple, and then people are trying to pull him out, and people are trying to wound the eels and stuff. His armor class basically saved him. That one had a grapple on him, but none of the rest were able to get a hold of him. And basically, I think with the help of one of these guys on shore, he managed to drag himself out, and they, beat that eel to death that was grappling him. And then they were like, oh, now, how are we going to get Nexel across to this relatively dry spot from this other side? They were thinking about him jumping halfway, and they could pull him out with a rope, and they were thinking maybe we have to use the immovable rod or something else. And it's one of those situations you're going to come across where something is totally clear to the DM, but just opaque to the players, because as a DM, you can't describe everything that you're seeing in your head. But I mean, in my mind, it would be simple for him to just turn around and grab whatever this is and use it, put it over here, and then he could be with the rest of the party, and there would just be a missing link in the chain. So I kind of finally suggested that to the party, and it was obvious that I hadn't described it well enough to make it clear that that kind of thing was possible. But they moved on, and they eventually get to Reed Manor. So patrolling out in front of Reed Manor are these two ogre zombies in these big sort of trench coat things with the hoods pulled up, and there's bandages all over their face. I mean, I told my players that they were ogre zombies, and they could tell from the minis that I got out, but their characters didn't immediately know. They just see these big hulking figures. One's kind of standing at the gate, and one is sort of wandering back and forth. So they decided, instead of starting a fight, let's see what happens if we approach these hulking figures. I think Nexel did the talking, or it might have been Atticus, but the text in the book says if anybody who approaches mentions potions, they'll say, "Follow me," and take them up to the manor, right? And if they say anything else, they'll just be like, "You not supposed to be here." So my players come up and they're like, "Well, hello there, sir. We are here to meet with the master of the house and discuss a business proposition that might be equally good, for beneficial to both parties, blah, 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 blah." And I just described him just blankly looking at the characters. And I wasn't willing to hold out until they actually said the word potions. I think they said something about buying. We're here to buy something, or we're here for business. There was some word that I cited was close enough to something the ogre zombie could understand. And so they took him up to the main house. So, again, this is a awesome little piece of terrain here to represent the interior of the house, but instead of fruits and vegetables, this is all alchemical stuff, right? And then there's a door back here that goes further into the house, and there's stairs down here that go downstairs, and my players come in, and they meet these 4 apprentices of Oscar Yoren. And I really hadn't prepared anything for these characters. I wasn't sure, actually, that my players were going to go this direction. I had a different idea for what they were going to do next. So I just looked at the names, and I thought apprentices. And so even though I'm always barking at my players about how this is a serious campaign and we're not supposed to be joking around and being silly, I basically used voices from Revenge of the Nerds and just turned them into 4 total nerd apprentices. So the players basically said that they wanted to meet Oscar Yoren, and they're like, "Nobody meets the master." Well, we want to discuss a business proposition with them. They're like, "Hey, if you want to buy potions, that's fine. Otherwise, get out." And they were basically stonewalling the characters. Atticus did manage to kind of get in, was having a side conversation with one of the other apprentices, and he noticed here on one of these tables. So he's an alchemist. He's proficient with practically every toolkit in the game, including alchemy. And he noticed that they had this alchemy set up, and they had some very rare ingredients. Now, he didn't know it, but they were the leaves of this arcane lotus or whatever, the arcane lilies that the players are eventually going to be looking for. But he spotted these dried leaves, and he spotted some powdered delirium, and so he filed that away in his brain. And the party was basically getting stonewalled. They were trying to figure out if they could charm one of these guys or something to try to get some information out of them. When I happened to, the druid Deus made a investigation check, or everybody was kind of looking around, and he noticed the text mentions all four of them have their familiars in the room. It's like a bat, a cat, a crow, and something else. I don't remember. But he goes over and starts talking to the rat. Because he's a gnome, he can talk to small animals, right? Basic concepts. And so, of course, since it's a rat, and I wasn't expecting this, he started talking like this. "You dirty rat, what do you want to know?" And it's like, "Oh, how do we get in good with your master?" And so he told them about the eldritch lilies, right? He didn't know where they were. He just knew they were an important ingredient, and they were worth a lot to the master, and if they wanted to get on the master's good side, they should get some eldritch lilies, right? And so they're deciding they need to leave. They don't want to start a fight just yet. They're going to back out and kind of gather their thoughts. And as they're going to do this, I had Atticus's player, who's the main note keeper for the group. Actually, him and Nexel both keep pretty good notes. I asked Atticus's player to go through all the rumors they had gathered. And way back in session 1, Nexel had disguised himself with Alter Self or whatever, and had been following Talon around, and had gotten a rumor that there was a place called Queen's Park Garden, and that there were these rare flowers that bloomed there that were supposed to have healing powers. So there's only two ways that players can find out that the eldritch lilies, like where they come from. One is if they just so happen to roll that rumor, and the other would, of course, be somehow to get Oscar Yoren's research. And they actually had heard that rumor by complete chance, and they remembered it, and they're like, "Oh, okay, well, we know we need to go to this park now." So this is the map of the northern part of Drakkenheim, and they are here at Area 7, which is Reed Manor. And some player off to the west here is Eckerman's Mill outside of the haze, right? And they know, I think they knew where Queen's Park Garden was, and most importantly, that it's in the inner city. So in the campaign, these walls, the walls of Drakkenheim, are mostly intact, and they're these high, 40 or 50 foot high walls that have all these creepy crawlies guarding them and all this stuff. And the players just know you can't just climb over them. Getting inside the walls and getting away in and out is a major campaign goal. So the players had already been to Shepherd's Gate, where the Hooded Lanterns had set up their own sort of fortifications, right? They had been there during their attempts with the Rat's Nest and everything else. So the players are like, "Okay, this is what we need to do. We need to go back to Shepherd's Gate, because we don't know what's haunting or guarding this gate on Academy Street, but we do know that the Hooded Lanterns will let us in." So they go back out. They rest at Eckerman's Mill. They come around, and they're trying to get into Shepherd's Gate so that they can talk to the Hooded Lanterns and find out about getting to Queen's Park. But of course, this is a pretty good distance in the haze. They had to decide what speed they were going. I think they were going fast, so they only had to roll one encounter roll, but they rolled an encounter roll. So the encounter they rolled, I think, indicated these wall gargoyles that guard the walls of the city. But, we don't call this the Dark Souls of Drakkenheim for nothing. I got out of the Dark Souls 5e book basically the equivalent of those things that I'd been wanting to use for quite some time. I had ordered and painted up these minis, which are kind of like the vampire things from The Witcher, and I kind of did them with the purple to represent them being part of the Dungeons of Drakkenheim campaign. So I had 4 of these things to kind of guard the walls. But the players, I can't control what the players rolled. Nexel rolled the dice, and he rolled 2 of these things. And I'm using these stats from the Dark Souls 5e book form, which are pretty badass. They do lightning and slashing damage. And then most of the monsters in the Dark Souls book have a bloodied special ability, where when they're down to half hit points, they start unleashing new abilities. For them, it's this stunning screech that they can unleash. So these things, my players were a little fed up with me. These things were unleashing a lot of damage, and the party was having a heck of a time. They had to use a bunch of their key points and everything else. They were actually considering, after this fight, going back out of the city and coming back, but they soldiered on. They made it to the to that Shepherd's Gate, and from there they were ushered into the camp, the faction headquarters for the Hooded Lanterns. So now they've made it to their second faction stronghold, which is the Drakkenheim garrison, and their old buddy Handsome Lang is there, and kind of gets the update from them and kind of lays out the situation for them. If they want to go to this Queen's Garden Park place, it's in the Deep Haze. So first of all, it's in the inner city, which means getting from the garrison to there, even though it's like about a half a mile, if they roll any encounters, they're going to be way overpowered for this party. I think they were still 3rd level. I don't think they were 4th level yet. But either way, the inner city is bad news, and Ansem was trying to impress that upon them, and they understood that. But they had bought 4 of these syringes from Oscar Wilde, whatever his name is, and so the potion that protects you is actually a syringe that you have to inject directly into your heart, which I thought was a great sort of dark fantasy sort of element. They have to inject this thing into their hearts. But they found out from the Hooded Lanterns that Oscar had not been providing them with as many potions lately, and the potions they had got were bad quality, and they wanted to find out what was going on with him, and they were wondering if the players could go back and be like, hey, the Hooded Lanterns want to know what your deal is. But the party was like, well, let's get these Eldritch Lilies first, and then we can go back and talk to Oscar, and we'll kind of be in a stronger bargaining position. So Ansem told him, okay, you got to get to the park, and then you'll be going into the Deep Haze when you go into the park. So that's when you have to inject yourself with this potion that's supposed to give you, protection from the corruption. Although, if it's one of the bad ones, you're going to end up with the poison condition and God only knows what else. So there was this really tense scene where the characters were trying to get there, and I think they were using Pass Without Trace, and they were just trying to do everything they could. They were hoping nobody would roll a 1, but if they did, they wanted to have every advantage to try to avoid the fight in the inner city and just get to the garden, look around, get some of these Eldritch Lilies, and get out. So they're passing without trace, they're moving through the city, and there was this really tense sequence where everybody's rolling these d20s, and I think 2 people got 1s, but of course I give my characters heroic inspiration every session. Everybody gets 1, and then of course they can earn more by rolling 20s or whatever else. But 2 people use their heroic inspiration for the session just so that the party wouldn't have a random encounter. And so they found themselves heading into this garden, and that's where we're going to pick up next time. Like I always say, give us a like and subscribe, maybe even share these videos with someone who might be interested, and we'll pick it up next week with the Henchman's Memoirs.